the moment my wife demanded a DNA test for our son. I knew our marriage had already broken. She didn't ask quietly. She didn't wait until we were alone. She stood in our kitchen, holding a cup of coffee with both hands, and said, "I want a DNA test. I need to know if Ethan is really yours." Our 8-year-old son was sitting at the dining table, coloring a picture of our family. He stopped. The red crayon slipped from his fingers. "Mom," he whispered. My wife's eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she looked at me. I've had doubts for years. I stared at her as if she had suddenly become a stranger. Doubts about what? About Ethan. The words hit harder than any accusation she could have made against me. Ethan was my whole world. I had been there when he took his first steps. I had stayed awake through his fevers. I had taught him to ride a bicycle, packed his lunches, attended every school play, and sat beside his bed whenever nightmares woke him. I had never questioned whether he was my son. Not once. But my wife had. And now she wanted a test. I swallowed the pain burning in my throat. "Fine," I said quietly. "We'll do it." She looked almost surprised that I hadn't argued. "Good." I walked over to Ethan and crouched beside him. "Hey, buddy." He looked at me with frightened eyes. "Are you mad at me?" My heart cracked. "No, buddy. Never. Mom thinks you're not my dad." I glanced at my wife, then back at my son. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared and confused," I said. "But none of that changes how much I love you." He threw his arms around my neck. I held him tightly. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. Whatever the test said, Ethan would never feel unwanted. The test was done 3 days later. The results arrived by email. My wife insisted we open them together. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her arms folded tightly. I opened the message. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I stared at the screen. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I suddenly realized how deeply she had wounded me for nothing. I pushed the laptop toward her. "He's my son." She looked at the result. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Okay. That's it. What do you want me to say?" I stood. "I want you to tell me why you thought I wasn't his father." She looked away. "I don't know." "You don't know." She rubbed her forehead. "I was insecure." "That isn't enough." She didn't answer. I walked out of the kitchen. For the next few weeks, our home became painfully quiet. Ethan noticed. Children always do. One evening, he found me sitting alone on the back porch. "Dad." I turned. "Yeah. Are you and Mom getting divorced?" My chest tightened. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you don't laugh anymore." I looked down. He sat beside me. "Did I do something?" I immediately pulled him into my arms. "No. Never think that." "Then why is everything different?" I didn't know how to explain betrayal to an 8-year-old. So I told him the truth he needed. Sometimes adults make mistakes. But you are not responsible for fixing them. He rested his head against my shoulder. "Okay." Then he whispered, "I still want us to be a family." That sentence nearly destroyed me. A month passed. Then another. My wife became increasingly distant. She started coming home late. She stopped answering simple questions. She kept her phone locked. And then, one Saturday morning, I found an envelope hidden inside the back of our bedroom closet. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my wife. I wasn't searching through her things. I was looking for the warranty papers for our washing machine. The envelope fell from behind a box. I picked it up and froze. The return address belonged to a fertility clinic. My hands began to shake. I opened it. Inside was a medical record. My wife's name was at the top. The date was 8 years earlier. The report described a procedure involving donor conception. I read it twice. Then a third time. My knees nearly gave out. Ethan was born after months of fertility treatments. But I had never known about a donor. I had believed he was biologically mine. The DNA test had confirmed that. Which meant the secret wasn't about Ethan. It was about something else. I waited until my wife came home. When she walked through the door, she saw the envelope on the kitchen table. Her face went white. "You found it?" I nodded. "You knew?" She closed the door behind her. "Yes. For 8 years." She began crying. "I was going to tell you." "When?" She didn't answer. "Why did you demand a DNA test?" She covered her face. "Because I was terrified." "Of what?" She looked at me through tears. "That you would discover the truth." I stared at her. "What truth?" She sat down. "The fertility clinic made a mistake." My stomach dropped. "What kind of mistake?" She took a shaky breath. "When we were trying to have Ethan, I was told the treatment had failed. They said there had been a problem with the donor material." I said nothing. Then, months later, I found out I was pregnant. My mind raced. "You said Ethan was yours and mine." "I thought he was." "Thought?" She nodded. "When Ethan was born, there was a paperwork discrepancy. I noticed it, but the clinic told me everything had been corrected." She looked at me. "Years later, I became suspicious." "That's why you demanded the DNA test?" "Yes. But the test proved I'm his father." She nodded slowly. "Exactly." Silence filled the room. I suddenly understood. She hadn't been accusing me because she believed I had cheated. She had been terrified that Ethan wasn't biologically related to either of us. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared you'd leave." I closed my eyes. "I might have been hurt." "I know. But I wouldn't have abandoned him." She began sobbing. "I know that now." The next morning, we contacted the clinic. What followed was a nightmare of paperwork. Phone calls, lawyers, and old medical records. Eventually, the clinic admitted there had been an administrative error. The donor records had been mixed up. Ethan was biologically my son. But the paperwork had revealed something else. Another child had been born around the same time using genetic material that belonged to me. A child I had never known existed. A little girl named Mia. She was 8 years old. She lived with her single mother, Rebecca, in a small apartment several states away. When I heard that, I couldn't breathe. I had a daughter. A child who had grown up without knowing me. The clinic arranged contact through lawyers. I expected anger. I expected confusion. I expected rejection. Instead, when I finally met Mia, she stood behind her mother, clutching a stuffed rabbit. I crouched down. "Hi, Mia." She studied my face. "You're my dad." I swallowed. "I'm your biological dad." She thought about it. Then she asked, "Do you like pancakes?" I almost laughed through my tears. "I love pancakes." She smiled. "Me too." That was how it began. Not with a dramatic reunion. Not with resentment. With pancakes. I started visiting whenever I could. I never tried to replace Rebecca. She was Mia's mother, and she had raised her with love. Instead, I became another person in Mia's corner. I helped with school projects. I attended her soccer games. I learned her favorite books. And I made sure Ethan understood that having a sister didn't mean he was losing anything. One evening, Ethan sat beside Mia on our living room floor. They were building a crooked tower out of wooden blocks. "Dad?" Ethan asked. "Yeah. Does this mean she's my sister?" I smiled. "Yeah." He looked at Mia. "Cool." Mia grinned. "I always wanted a brother." Ethan handed her the last block. "Then you got a good one." My wife watched from the doorway, tears running silently down her face. Our marriage didn't survive. Some wounds were too deep. Trust, once broken, couldn't simply be repaired because everyone was sorry. But something beautiful came from the wreckage. My family became bigger. Not perfect. Not traditional. But real. Years later, I stood in a crowded school auditorium watching Ethan and Mia receive awards together. Rebecca sat beside me. My former wife sat 2 rows ahead. When Ethan finished his speech, he looked into the audience. Families aren't always made the way you expect, he said. Sometimes they're made by love, forgiveness, and people choosing to stay. I felt tears fill my eyes. Mia reached for my hand. I squeezed it. The DNA test had started with suspicion. It had exposed a secret. It had ended a marriage. But it had also revealed something none of us expected. A child who needed a father. A brother who gained a sister. A mother who needed someone to stand beside her. And a broken family that discovered it could still choose kindness. I used to think being a father meant sharing someone's blood. I know better now. Blood can tell you where a child came from. But love tells you who you are willing to become for them. And sometimes, the greatest gifts hidden inside life's most painful truths are the people we never knew we were missing.